Okay, so hi everyone, and welcome to the Academy of Advanced Thoughts. And today we are going to talk about some various different topics around one major theme, which is how change can actually be instigated and actually happen. We've spent many conversations, dozens of conversations around various different themes, but they do tend to be theories, and maybe there is a need to at least address the practical challenges and ways to overcome those challenges of actually making things happen. The reason we're on this call, ostensibly a second part of, or part two of the most recent Academy conversation, because Charlotte said 5 days ago, Charlotte Bowen said, I really enjoyed this and would like to explore further. It's very important, relevant, real subject. Thank you for hosting. And Christy then said, that she's been thinking about it over the last few days. And, do you think it's necessary to create a mathematical model? If not, why not? Prashant then commented as well. And so we kind of went back and forth around that. And I think that's the premise of this. And then, without doing a long introduction, what I would say is that as I share any thoughts in moderating this, I really would like all of us to really concentrate on what would it take to really make things happen systemically. That doesn't need to be radical. It can be small micro changes, or it can be wholesale changes. But I think we're all on the same page in as much as things that there may be better ways of running things, and I mean that from a cultural perspective, societal perspective at large, through to an economic perspective, of which this is the lead into this conversation for. And so what we don't, I think, need to do now, because of part one, is discuss whether or not things need to change. I think one of the reasons why things don't, however, change is because we don't necessarily have structures and processes in place for change to happen. I say that from the perspective of being a best-selling author on a book called Powered by Change, which gives an entire guidebook as to how to make things happen. But so let's start with Fiona, and then to Christy, and then to Matt. And Fiona, I would like to ask your opinion, just in starting with, what from your opinion have you ever seen things that have changed from one paradigm shift to another? And what was the, if you could say, some form of root structure of that change? How did change happen that you witnessed in your career and your life, that you could say, well, you know what, this happened then, and that might be a model that we can use or copy or learn from? What would you say? I'm going to just click you off mute. There, you might need to click a button because there's something on there. But we're all old hats at that now.
People don't like change, and they can talk about it, but there is the discomfort zone. So we think, there's the comfort zone, and that we think that's where we are, but most people are in a discomfort zone. So it has the word comfortable. They're okay, but they're comfortable enough to endure that they don't really like it. And that's the way most of us live. And it's kind of like as if you're, being told you could get a flight somewhere, and you're in the lounge. You go to the airport lounge, and you can go to Costa Coffee, and you can go to Dixon's or Curry's or whatever, and you waste time. You see your flights coming up, and you go, I can get the next one. I don't feel like running. You don't really like it there, but you don't feel like running. We just let things go. Oh, we'll change tomorrow. We'll change tomorrow. Boom, there's a war. Change. Boom, there's cow virus, and it changes. Any big laws, it's it's come out of a revolt or something like that. Look at the virus. I mean, I do think good things will come out of this, but it's very, very hard to get things that people are kind of comfortable with. I mean, look at slavery. It was disgusting. And how long did it take to get people to have a dialogue to change it? So changing it through common sense, through what's right, is very difficult. I just finished watching a program on the American food industry. Will we change, or will we go, yeah, there's loads of shit in that food, but we'll eat it, because to actually fight it will be really difficult. So I think change is difficult because we are okay with having a discomfort zone.
That makes a lot of sense. I think that's very, very well said. You know that I concur with that. And so, as I pass to Christy, going on from the back of what Fiona was saying in terms of the discomfort zone, and obviously you and I have a very similar view of these things in any case. But let's talk about how people could get out of that discomfort zone, how they, or rather feel okay with being uncomfortable, or realizing that things actually could be different. What would you say? How could we actually fundamentally do that?
So I think like probably one of the biggest inhibitors to change is actually not addressing what that change actually means for people and addressing their concerns with that. So, working in organizations that have wanted to change, they've typically taken an approach of, we're going to do this, and announced it in a group meeting, and then not dealt with the emotional and psychological aspects of what it actually means for people. So personally, I think taking a more humanistic or human-centered design approach to firstly actually understanding what the challenges are, right? And what that kind of means for people before working out, well, how can we address them or anything else like that. So you actually need to come back and listen to people, and so they feel heard. From that perspective. So taking probably initially a more ethnographical type approach for understanding.
And do you think that a government would actually ever want to do that?
Would a government ever want to do that?
Yeah. Because I have to say that my view is that that we are not in a situation where we can rely on the bureaucracy to want to make these changes. I'm of the mindset that alternative models will stand a greater chance if they don't involve the bureaucracy that's consistently shown its disinterest in adjusting their own self-fulfilling system. I also believe that alternative models should start with purpose first, as you've just said, and human purpose first. After all, what it appears we're talking about here is enabling greater human peace, safety, and equality, and regardless of what words we use, be that happiness, fulfillment, and so forth, whatever alternative models we consider, I believe that, as you've said, we have to address human betterment from a human perspective. But when I look for inspiration in places, I see examples of human betterment where there is generosity through gratitude and kindness, which could subvert systems. So for instance, Paul Heaton from the Beautiful South and the House Martyrs, he's got a reputation for his generosity, great guy. And he even offered to assign the royalties from some of his hits like Happy Hour and Rotterdam to pay the NHS staff. And he said, and I quote, "I felt I'd made enough money from them." And so to me, this looks like inspiration from some form of rewiring of the system. And the way that Heaton proposed it was to give the money to the government and then pay the NHS. But I wonder how he could have done that directly to hospitals and care workers, and how can this rewiring work without government intervention? Because I think that's what needs to happen. And if we look really carefully at the rerouting, rewiring carefully using a system I wrote in Powered by Change called Elevation, what's happening essentially is linking, so let's look at rewiring. What I'm talking about is linking assistance to action via generosity. And I can envisage even a digital platform of sorts that has got a curated dynamic list of the most pressing needs requiring action, and then specific details of the type and volume of assistance needed. And then the assistance doesn't need to mean cash, construction, creativity, or clothes. It can be whatever. And then the generosity is then linked to that requirement. And so we have a generosity or assistance currency that isn't based on having to have a value exchange numerically or that kind of approach. Matt, is anything that I've said in landing in your perspective in terms of that view of actually needing to work outside of bureaucracy?
Yes, as much as I could follow your very speedy brain. I was with you towards the end. Okay. But look, I do agree that if you try and encourage governments to instigate this or make it something that a government takes ownership of too soon, absolutely, it's not going to work. They've proven it time and time again. That it just, their whole setup, and you've said this plenty of times yourself, and I fully agree with it. It's all about winning. It's about winning power, and then basically they rally around looking at how they can maintain and keep that power. Hence, so many promises get broken and all the rest of it, and we all just get perpetually disappointed. So, I do think that it is a kind of grassroots movement, and I think that to look at ways to ignite people's imagination would be a very good start. Which I guess kind of comes in and sort of echoes some of Christie's points about, you have to keep checking back in with the people that you're trying to get on board and get their feedback and find out, what's resonating, what isn't, so that they feel part of the process. So okay. Hence, very loosely what I'm trying to do with Happy Sapien is to start to bring people out of that fear state where, when you're terrified or when you're furious, you try putting together a cohesive argument. It just doesn't happen. You just shut down. And so it would be, if there were ways to encourage people on an individual level to get away from that fear state, open up the imaginative part of their brain again, which could not only make them feel a little bit more control in their own lives and think about possibilities in a real micro level that they could change, but if that then collectively led to some commonalities in a collective imagination that could start formulating in terms of, okay, these are some ideas, and now here's some practicalities, whether that's existing technology which could sort of slot in part, or whether that it inspires people to come up with, okay, let's design this bit that's missing. I think a decent way of doing it.
Okay, so let's for the sake of this call, and actually not just for the sake of the call, also because I'm very biased towards this being an opportunity for the Happy Sapien movement here. Fiona, over to you. If I were to say to you, right, there's this group that exists, and at the moment it's on Facebook, and I know that you don't use Facebook very much, as you continually remind us all on Facebook when we're going, how do we get in touch with this elusive Miss Austin? How do we, if I said to you, we've got this group, and the purpose of the group is to reconstruct the way of society operating, and we're brave because we believe that we believe that there is going to be a massive opportunity here that everyone can buy into. My suspicion is that what would be needed is some form of manifesto that covers the correct elements, and I mean correct as in reasonable and practical, rather than just purely esoteric platitudes. So the correct elements of structure. And I said to you, Fiona, as the intelligent, emotionally and practically intelligent structural sanity check mechanism that is Fiona Austin, what would you suggest to be general guidance principles of that?
The minute I hear the word manifesto and all of that kind of thing, I mean, I agree that's got to be done, but what keeps coming up is, to me, is like Dunbar's numbers, and then that wonderful kind of happening in Berlin, where they saved their housing, and just in general, even like Grenfell, when people are in smaller numbers, they can do something. If you try to have a manifesto that covers people in Tower Hamlets and the people in Henley, I don't know if the manifesto will be that broad. But what I like is the devolution of and the decentralization of the concept. If we look at any future movie, it's always like these big mega skyscrapers, and now it's people going, no, maybe we can get back to our little hamlets, maybe we can create mini towns, and they're much easier to reflect. You know, you've got your kibbutzes, you've got your guerrilla gardeners. When people, like-minded people, have come together, we're together, but we're preaching to the converted, to each other.
Yeah,
in a way.
Hence asking. So, and I think you hit a good point. Dunbar's numbers, for those watching, Dunbar's number is a theory that suggests that there's a cognitive limit to how many people you can have for stable social relationships, and over a certain amount, be it 150 or whatever, there is no stability inside a social interaction. And Fiona's thesis, which I think has a great deal of merit, is that gaining a manifesto of 10 million people being part of it doesn't necessarily create a manifesto that's 10 million times better than the manifesto of one. And what's more so is that it is possibly more to do with individualistic changes and small societal community-based changes rather than one wholesale change. But I'll still, Fiona, hand that back to you and say, if we were to make the Happy Sapien group around a ideology to begin with that has an absolute guaranteed practical requirement. So we start from an ideology potentially and then build the practical elements. Would that be the right procedure to follow, or does one actually not need an ideological framework to start with, in your opinion?
I think keep it simple is always the way, and then incrementally increase. So manifesto's big, ideology is in a way small. So most people will agree on elements of kindness, generosity, and so on. It starts to get complicated when one version, you know, generosity might be somebody helping their neighbor. Loads of people don't want to do that. I think, and what I was saying last week, we can have these theories, these economic theories, but to get a blanket one is hard. I'm sadly, I do like Star Trek, and I do like the fact that they had brilliant economic theories running through the back of them. They explored these kind of, under the guise of alien nations, some really complicated, but certainly talked about societies that they would land in. So Earth itself no more had money. And to get rid of that is one concept to work from, because right now they're getting rid of money. But there's still this not so very satisfactory exchange, and one that's really easily monitored. But people do like that concept of exchange, and yeah. Can that work? Where it's like, where would we start? What ideology, and then how would we knit it together? Good. Huge.
Good question. And if I were to be put on the spot, and someone said, where would you start? You know, what's the ideology? and I know I'm supposed to be moderating this, but there's a lot of times where I actually have a significant opinion on this stuff that no one actually asked me about, so I'm going to interject with the way that I would answer that question. I know where I would start, and where I would start with is an ideology that reduces the human elements of greed and comparison to one another, and that I have noticed in certain territories around the world, Tibet being one, and others, where actually they have a totally different index of how societies are looked after. The question I then have is, because I could write that ideology down now in a chat window, and I think you all pretty much know what it would then look like. The question I have in my head is, would people sign up to that and actually operate like that if it actually involved them realizing that the turmoil that they're in, this samsara, as the Tibetan would call it, is there's only two ways out. One is through death and the other is through enlightenment. And the way to enlightenment is to stop being prisoners of our thoughts and actually silence our minds, so we can actually realize what is actually happening where we are, rather than always either time traveling backward and living in the past trauma, or time traveling forward and imagining what you're going to look like when you've got a bigger car than your neighbor. And so that's pretty much what I would say. I don't know, Fiona, whether any of that resonates, and then I'll pass over to you, Christy, and then Matt. Oh, I'm just going to try to unmute here, but I'll let you do that. There you go.
Get rid of greed would be incredible. Can we go back in time and get people to give up their TVs and their I suppose if we recognize that people won't do that, we can start with the other point that you mentioned, which is enlightenment. And I don't think any form of enlightenment is taught in schools. There is no how to be calm, how to be generous. We've got hugely greed-worthy subjects in school. We don't have the subject of kindness. We don't have the subject of stoicism or challenge. So starting at learning how to cook, that would be good. Just self-care, care of the environment, that would start to change our priorities.
Totally. We should spend more time learning how to garden than learning how many wives King Henry VIII had. And I must admit, by the way, just and I'll pass over to you now, Christy, sorry, just have to answer this point myself just for a second. I agree with you, Fiona, massively on that point, apart from one precursor, which is, could we time travel back to the time and convince people to give their TVs up? If someone created right now a biosphere or an off-the-grid structure or a seasteading institute offshore structure, my wife and I would highly likely go, and we don't actually own a TV, and we don't own a car, and we don't own almost anything. We don't have any ownership, and we've due to this year, and due to specifically March the 23rd actually, but also 2 years of being royally screwed by my ex-business partner, we actually ended up with nothing. So funnily enough, I've never felt more enlightened. And also I could absolutely see that type of living, because frankly, the only reason we're still in the UK is because we literally can't get on flight. And so actually, yeah, I can see it. I can visibly see that type of future. But maybe there's both. Maybe the people who want to actually live in a way like that can, and also we need to address the application of enlightenment into society. I have to pass to Christy. Sorry, Fiona, I will come back to you. Christy, what's your view from what we've been discussing here? Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Look, I'm not really sure where to start, Jonathan, to be honest with you.
That's all right. Do you want me to pass over to Matt first?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, Matt.
Thanks.
Reflections from what Fiona and I were discussing.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's loads. One thing that I thought might be worth mentioning, in the same way that last, in session one, where or after session one, where Christy suddenly came out with do we even need mathematics to create an economic model? Which made my thinking just go, yeah, really good point. We're even chained to that. You know, I'm wondering to what degree this whole thing about people don't like change is almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, because we tell ourselves so often that we don't like change, that we're uncomfortable with change. Yet if you frame that in terms of people being hungry for the next iPhone or the next bit of tech, they're almost waiting for it and want change almost the minute they've got the last version. So is there a way of kind of challenging that and saying how much of it is that we don't like change, and we've just been told so much that we don't like it, that
Yeah.
you know, how much it can we shift that sense of unease?
Well, I believe so. I mean, yeah, I mean, out of the 88,000 words I wrote on that topic, the absolute fact is that I have managed through Power by Change words, I've convinced some of the largest, in fact, the largest private company in the world, and many of the largest companies, and very small companies, and one person units, to fundamentally change their feeling about change. And so, and how I've done that is to firstly prove from a holistic perspective that change is the only thing that we can expect to happen, and also that today's the slowest pace of change we'll ever experience. And so it is then absolutely not kind of a choice about whether change happens, because one of the things I found is the resistance to change is actually an inherent, that if we look into the comfort zone and zoom in and zoom in and zoom in and zoom in, what's really going on is either fear or greed. And the fear part is that they won't be able to gain as much if things change, which is the greed part, which is that they want to actually, people want to gain more and more and more and more and more, and then compare themselves against each other. So if we look at fear and greed, the argument that I've put forward, which has worked, which has had some success, is that change can actually enable you to gain more. So you can actually become wealthier if that's what you want. You can double your share price if that's what you want, through actually being powered by change and using this mechanism to increase sales. And they're like, can you really show me? And then you pull out a terabyte worth of case studies and go, well, like these 3,000 companies. And they're like, I buy it. And then they apply something, and then it works. And then all of a sudden it's like, ding, ding, ding. Okay, we can make more money out of change. We've now seen that. So that was the first thing. And that's a Trojan horse, right? So they now are okay with the fact that uncertainty can actually end up with share price value. So they're like, sweet. And then you look at it and you go, of course there's that. And now you've become a billionaire, which is awesome. And there's the fact that the legacy you're leaving for your children is that when the sea level is risen by 111 centimeters, you're going to be responsible for 31 of them, just you and your company. So yes, you're a billionaire and that's going to be fantastic. But when you tell your grandchildren what you did for a living, you're going to be responsible for a third of the sea level rise. And that's going to hurt, because that's the whole of California wiped out, which is where your summer home is. So then all of a sudden they've bought wholesale into change as a concept. And then you backload purpose and reason. And as soon as you backload purpose and reason, they're already okay with change. And then they go, I've just had this massive revelation. I'm not doing what I want to do in my life. And you go, well, the good thing is you've got a toolkit, because you doubled your turnover by going with change. So we know we can still use change. And I've never seen anything act so fast. It's how you now see companies like IKEA, for instance, investing billions and billions into becoming climate positive, largely due to the fact that they first used change as a profit-making exercise, and now use change because it's the right sodding thing to do. And so that's what I found to be a very, very powerful process. And I don't know, Matt, if any of that resonates with you.
Yeah, I mean, that's encouraging to hear, you know, and you kind of beat me to the punch, because as we were talking about these people getting excited about billionaires, I thought, yeah, but we've still missed the point. The ultimate goal is still money. So yeah, I'm glad I didn't interrupt sooner.
And also, here's the thing as well, and Christy, I'll pass over to you now, so get ready with your thoughts. I think one of the things that I'm also illustrating with this is that we can't easily destabilize a capitalist gain-based, greed-based structure. But what we can do is show that these opportunities exist. And what I have found is the majority of people really, at the end of the day, do want things to be better than they are. Really, the majority of people, and I'm optimistic about that.
Absolutely. Just before you change, the other thing I was going to comment on was greed, and that being a driver. And absolutely, I think it would be incredibly naive to just assume that we can just encourage people to go, okay, well, I won't be greedy anymore. But maybe we can encourage people to get greed for something different. In fact, the Oroville example, their little mission statement, their little description, when I looked at that, you know, this part of southern India that have, you know, created a different way of living. And under their thing, vision, and we're talking about money, the quote is, money is not meant to generate money. Money should generate an increase in production, an improvement in the conditions of life, and a progress in human consciousness. Now, if you can encourage people to get greedy for that, and that's what makes you wealthy, not 15 mansions that eventually are going to end up underwater, and a load of fancy cars that devalue the minute you drive them off the forecourt, unless you're really shrewd, which are still going to help destroy the planet, so you've got nowhere to fucking drive them anyway. That's you right. know, can we encourage people to get to re-evaluate what wealth actually is, and then tap into the propensity for greed and just make you greedy for that instead?
Yeah. In fact, to that point, I think that the way I've always liked Totnes for the Totnes pound. And actually showing how an alternative currency could work. It reminds me of Virgil, which I mentioned last time. I'm a fan of creating an environment and saying, this is how things could be. You're all welcome. And what we'd need for that to happen, by the way, is a town somewhere that actually has an actual leaning toward that type of experiment. Fiona, over to you. You've got your hand up. I've seen you, and I was there, straight on the money. Go for it. You'll need to unmute yourself though. Oh, still need to unmute yourself. We'll get there. There you go. Go for it.
I lived in a small village in Spain for 10 years, and so siesta would come, and you would get an American tourist going, why are all the shops closed? They could make loads of money. The town knew, it was a small town. They knew they didn't, that they could make more money, but they were happy. They were with their family. They were drinking. The men used to sit in circles on the beach and clap and sing songs while the women sat in other corners. It was that, and it was, 2018. There are people who live that amazing life. But just in case, I'll sign up for this other world, and you can buy a whole town in Spain for €1, and even the Spanish government will get. There's loads of them, and they're amazing. You can walk through them, and they're there for the taking. So sign me up for this manifesto. I'm going.
There you go. Well, this is very encouraging because I think there is a way. I mean, one of the most shocking things I've ever heard in my life is when I was consulting WPP at Ogilvy and advertising agency, and I was doing some work with Mediacom, one of their kind of stable mates in WPP, and Mediacom own a village where all is just advertising. And the people live there highly subsidized, if not free of charge, but they experience all different types of advertising. And Mediacom use it as an experiment to see what advertising is most effective or not. It's just a village of advertising, right? And I was like, we're fucked as a race. And so my view is, but however, if I can take the elements out of that works, I really do believe that if we could actually create what good could look like, and I'm talking of having a farm type community, having a school that actually teaches the things that need to be taught, having an economy that actually is a pure circle, and having a sustainable approach to transport, sustainable, and actually create that. And rather than actually try and unfuck the system, sorry for my, excuse my French, from the outside, we actually say we're not even going to bother putting out stuff that kind of that has a picture of, you know, Boris and Trump next to each other in interchangeable faces. That we can leave that to the kind of the propaganda machines. What we're actually going to do is just do it. We're going to create a structure of that. We do it and call it Happy Sapien Town and build it, and then go to everyone. Who wants to live like that then? And everyone goes, me. And then we take it one more town, and then we take another town. And then eventually what happens is that people, I think governments would start looking at that and thinking, like maybe in Iceland, or maybe that kind of like an Estonia, and go, we could actually import all of these principles. And then of course, what we would have to address is, how can we not allow it to be ruined by the same structures that got us here in the first place? What is the quality control mechanism, you know? But anyway, Christy, over to you, because I'm conscious of the fact that I said that 17 minutes ago and I never did. So what have you got in your mind?
Okay, so my first thought was, I'm wondering if part of the reason that people don't like change is because they don't know what alternatives are or how they can actually change. So, you know, that's potentially part of the problem. In regard to needing a manifesto, don't know about a manifesto, they have a tendency to be misappropriated. And that's very evident with, as an example, the manifesto of Agile software development. It's completely misused. I'm also wondering, you know, like in terms of creating new systems and stuff, I think it's important to pose the question in a way that doesn't present it as an ethical debate, as a them versus us, because what you'll end up with is something that's never going to get solved, or is going to be very difficult to get solved and take years. And classic examples are things like climate change, vegans versus non-vegans, stuff like that. So I think the way and the framing of the question needs to be put in a way that's not ethical and comes back to more of how would you like to live, rather than we want this new model because X model's no good or whatever. Yes. And in looking at how we can change things going forward, like I think there's an importance of being cognizant of what new messes could be created, right? So capitalism's been created, and advertently or inadvertently, there's a number of messes that have, or challenges that have arisen as a result of that, which potentially weren't thought about and haven't necessarily been thought about and addressed. So in creating any new models, any new structures or anything else, we need to be cognizant of what they could potentially be, and how they could be addressed as well. So in terms of not needing an economic model, I have a couple of reasons I think that. One, building mathematical models requires a shit ton of data, historical data. Building it for something that doesn't yet exist would require using a lot of proxy data and assumptions. So the outcomes are probably not that great anyway. And when something happens, they break down, right? So that's my thinking around why we don't need an actual mathematical model. And I'm kind of thinking more in terms of systems and processes of how you get from there, you know, like the very start to something at the end. And you know what my thoughts are on this, Jonathan, because I've sent you a design on how that can work.
Well, here's the thing, actually, I'm going to go as far as to say, right, Matt, that here's the deal, mate. What you could do with Happy Sapiens, or we could do, is, or you're the leader, we could use Happy Sapiens to create the blueprint for a happy town, right? Of how things could actually work. If you were to do that, Christy is in my opinion, and she'll hate me for saying this, the world's leading expert at productizing how that could work, like systematically, like the bits and pieces. She's also been using Powered by Change, the book, into a software as a service system that actually could be used for ethical ventures, for new townships and whatever. And I think that that would be, I mean, it sounds a bit it would sound trivial for about 4 weeks until a plan started to come together, and the people actually started taking it serious and went, right, okay, so who's going to look at the education part and what actually the education system needs to run like? And then suddenly these documents appear, and it's like, this is actually what's needed. And if we work on the assumption that actually getting a physical space with physical people isn't far-fetched, I, by the way, could populate it with about 60 people immediately who are massively disillusioned with the situation they're in at the moment. And, you know, there's a lot of people, but basically there's an entire brain drain of the country who are going, listen, you know, with this, we just don't sign up to this stuff. And I think that type of, it is ideological, but I think unapologetically, I think the purpose of it would be to show what could be built and what it could work like. You know, would it be possible to output well-adjusted children who understand what respect means and understand the value of seeds in the ground and understand the importance of the water cycle versus the Tudors? Could that be an outcome? Could we actually transport ourselves without putting new holes in the ozone layer? Surely. Could we consume things that aren't made of things that take 1 million years to deproduce in the ground? Surely this can actually happen. Fiona, what are you thinking about this nuts plan for creating a happy town?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, oh, you can.
Loud and clear.
Well, I mean, you know, with Christy talking about manifestos and models, I agree. But I do also think that what we're talking about is the Amish. You know, they live in a town, they don't consume, they share their, you know, apart from the sort of God element, they, you know, they're happy. You know, unless you watch some weird program about how they're, you know, not. But essentially that's what we're thinking of, like a community from the 60s or the 70s or whatever. And, you know, there are people who break away. The islands in Norway, Sweden, they've got people who've just said enough and they go. And they work. They are everywhere. And those towns in Spain where they sell for €1, because people leave and go to the city, and they're there and they're hugely fertile. There are people, whilst there's loads of us who would leave, there are so many people who want that city world as well. It is, well, we are diverse peoples.
Yeah, I must admit.
But I'm privileged to have these thoughts. There are some people who are in, you know, Hong Kong, tower block upon tower block upon tower block. They don't have the capacity because they've never seen a cow graze or whatever it would be.
And so to your point about the Amish, and to any Amish viewers watching here, I will say this with massive respect for all life and all beliefs. The Amish believed fundamentally in God's will. And so, for instance, that if a house burns down, it's God's will. And the reason why they don't have smoke alarms is because it's God's will. They remove certain items from the way of normal life because it's God's will. The reason why women can't cut their hair is because it's God's will. They can't shave because it's God's will. There's no alcohol because it's God's will. And they remove girls' teeth because it's God's will. And so I have a fundamental issue with a will and infrastructure that requires us to surrender free will and buy into the presumption of some other higher power. So, but however, that aside, the Amish do not use electricity because they feel as if it would bring them too close to the grid that everyone else is on, and it underlines the benefits of the culture. I also believe that their view of community and society is brilliant in its infrastructure. Funnily enough, I was married to a Catholic lady for quite a while of my life, and some of the really most powerful community feelings I've ever felt in my entire life or at the church functions where you actually do land into a family of 390 people. And it's just like, this is awesome. So, you know, it's really, and everyone's working together and stuff. And so, and this is from being an agnostic. So I'm, you know, another culture we could look at would be the Tibetan Buddhists. And I think that there are lots of these pockets around, but there's going to be down to what is the higher, is the higher power some form of theism, or in fact is the higher power a belief that human betterment, human improvement, and human happiness is the overarching goal? And that's, I think, maybe that alignment. Fiona, do you feel, and in closing reflection, do you feel as if that could be maybe the only commonality is the fact that that's what we're actually heading toward here, rather than a God?
Well, I think it's that word power, and power corrupts. And if any, you know, new society can be made, how do we get away? How do we make it so that there is no one in power? Because once power comes in, it crumbles. The reason why I was wondering if the group, the Happy Sapiens, was based on the Hari book is because ultimately human beings were at their optimum before farming, before ownership, before greed.
Yep.
And we lived in harmony for 2 million years. The last 10,000, no.
Yeah. Oh. Yes, indeed. Sorry, it was a sharp cut off there, Fiona. Thank you. Christy, hand over to you, Christy, for your final reflections, and thank you, Fiona, for that. Christy, what are you thinking?
Look, you know, I'm not religious, so I'm thinking if you're going to have a group of people that come together, it's got to be people that believe what you believe, right? Some of the people that leave communities, compounds, cults, whatever, do so because there's a fundamental difference in what they believe versus what the other person believes. So if you can find a group of people that believe what you believe, or that believe what we believe, then I think that's kind of where it starts, without necessarily having a higher power. And when I think about structures in terms of reporting and stuff like that in organizations, currently it's all hierarchical. There's a few organizations that I'm aware of that are making more circular reporting structures, things like co-ops, so that Mondragon example that I put onto the Facebook group. So I think if you're looking at something like of how it works in terms of a circular structure, you're probably going to get a lot more benefit and value as well. And I think organizations eventually will move that way.
Yeah, well said. Okay, and Matt, over to you in closing. What's your final thoughts?
Final thoughts, I think, I mean, look, yeah, I would be very surprised if any of us on this call were particularly religious. I think, you know, we all might believe in some, you know, existence of God, for want of a better word, but in different ways. But, you know, I remember having conversations with you, you know, a couple of bottles of wine down, just saying it could well be that God, for want of a better word, is actually very small and inside each one of us. And if you can start to kind of resonate and vibrate, and collectively maybe a you know, a universal knowledge will make itself apparent, but we've, you know, but it working from the inside out rather than being you know, under the control of this, you know, imaginary force, universal consciousness, God, Allah, whatever you want to call it, you know, this other, and that somehow, you know, we have to act in a way that pleases them. So I think that maybe you might find that some sort of religion might almost appear later down the track, in the same way that maybe some kind of mathematical you know, representation of an alternative way of living might appear later on, in the way that quantum physics is suddenly, and mathematics is starting to explain stuff that was essentially you know, kind of hunches or feelings or intuition. So, you know, that's my feeling on that. I think by continually asking people questions and saying, look, imagine this scenario. I mean, I thought that maybe one thing to do with Happy Sapien, and sorry, just to answer your question about getting involved with Happy Sapien, bring it on. If you wanted to do this and you wanted to say, well, could we create a happy town, and that could be a way of framing it. I never have any interest in being the face or the owner of Happy Sapien for very long. That's half the point. Do you know what I mean? This has got to be something that we all, in the levels that we are willing to take ownership for it. If that's just making an occasional comment, if that's being there in the background and listening, but knowing that really I'm a follower, not a leader. So, you know, I've bought into it and that's as far as I want to, that's fine. You know, if this thing's changed names, couldn't give a shit. You know what I mean? It's as long as action happens, I'm delighted. But I started to think about maybe starting to pose questions as a way of at least starting to ignite people's imaginations in this, because they do. I think, you know, that change, resistance to change in the comments previously about that they want to know what the alternative is. You could start to almost spin that round. And, you know, for example, what if, for example, interest rates, rather than being proportional to the amount of credit you've got and essentially the amount of wealth you've got, deciding what their interest rate is, what if interest rates were proportional to the amount of environmental impact and social contribution? So you could get a much more attractive interest rate if you were starting up a social enterprise and it was a, you know, completely circular, and your previous credit didn't matter.
Yeah.
What would that mean to you? What would it open up to in your own personal dreams? What would that mean to you as an existing business who maybe benefit from low interest rates because you've got great credit, but you're just making something that's destroying the planet, you know? And ask these kind of questions, which you could then at least start to, as you brought out particular solutions to work, you are presenting it to hopefully an audience who have at least spent some time framing this in terms of their own life.
Yeah.
And what,
Perfect. I think that's a great approach. Let's now reflect on this overnight then, and all communicate in our Facebook groups about the next steps. I suspect that what those next steps are then is to actually start asking questions in the Happy Sapiens group that are quite directive around, imagine if there were to be a city somewhere, a town somewhere that had a school and a farm and a thing, whatever. How could these bits work? And yeah, I think that would be, let's just put it out there and see. I have to go now, so I'm going to have to wrap things up. But thank you so much for this opportunity to hear from you guys and speak with you guys. For those watching at home, I'm sure that you've found the Happy Sapiens group. However, as a little hobbyist web designer, I'll inevitably try and donate some of my services to creating at least a kind of holding page of a site to to do things. So no worries. So yeah, let's see how the night treats us and the day treats us in Christie's case, and see how we feel about things. But I really do feel quite optimistic about that, because, you know, we spend so much time looking at the negative, and it's like, you know what, let's park just for a moment, suspend our disbelief and park the negative and just go, what if, and start from that. And I think that's, let's give some people some hope, right? And actually, but hope that's structured around reality, that actually why can't we do this? Virgil, you know, Michael, but in the story that I mentioned, he was so successful in Virgil that the European bank lost their shit. It was, you know, no one had ever created so much change. The problem is that Michael wasn't very good at politics. So eventually he actually couldn't continue operating because he hadn't worked the hierarchy out. Same as the Iceland crowdsourced constitution was absolutely legendary, but when it fell apart, the reason it fell apart was that they hadn't actually worked out what would happen if it worked to such an extent that the political infrastructure would force it to take down. So one of the things that is in my head is I want to bring one particular guy into this mix who's an international lawyer and say to him, if you could create a happy town somewhere that is least likely to get screwed over by the government, where would it be? And so thinking about the problems that are likely to happen in success backwards is probably a good place to start. Right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day or night wherever you are, and I shall speak to you all soon. Thanks, guys.
Amazing. Cheers.
Cheers. See you later.